Welcome back to the channel. So for this kind of first go around about Lord of the Rings, I thought we'd discuss one of the overarching themes that Tolkien puts into his work, and that is free will. The elves are so concerned about not stepping on other people's free will that it gets played off kind of as humorous sometimes. When Frodo and his friends encounter Gildor in the woods in the Shire, they ask him what they should do, and he doesn't really want to tell them. And one of the hobbits is like, well, you know what they say, don't go to the elves for counsel because they'll say both no and yes. And Gildor's like, well, but how can I advise you when I don't know your business? You know your business better than I do. But for friendship's sake, I'll give you this advice. And then basically his advice is do what you were going to do anyway. So he doesn't really put himself out there. But we see this again with at the council meeting. We see that Elrond has called this meeting, and it looks like fate or chance or God is really in motion and making sure the right people are at this meeting. And yet, when you listen to Boromir tell why he's there, you understand that actually there's a point here about free will. So Boromir is telling his story, and he says, the reason I'm here is my brother kept having this dream. And we hear this from Faramir again later, that over and over he has this dream. He's been told to go to this council, and there will be these, major discussions going on about the future of civilization, basically, the future of the planet. And he needs to be a part of it. And he goes to his father. He's like, Father, I keep having these dreams. I need to go. And the father's like, no, you're not going. And Faramir won't disobey his father. So eventually he stops having the dreams. And then Boromir has the same dream, goes to his father, asks permission, is given permission to go out and find out what's going on. So Boromir's like, this dream came to my brother many times and then once to me. So literally it looks like whatever's trying to prompt people to go to this meeting wants Faramir. Faramir's the A team, all right? Boromir's the B team. But when it's clear that Faramir's not going to go, he's not going to disobey his father, he will stay at home, then whoever you want to say is behind all this goes, all right, they've exercised their free will. They're not going to do what I want. Go into plan B. Let's see what happens when we ask Boromir to come. And that kind of brings up an interesting thought experiment then, because what if Faramir had gone? Faramir, as we find out later, is much stronger than his brother. The ring does not have sort of hold over him that it does over his brother. And so if he had gone, and if he had been part of the Nine, he probably wouldn't have been tempted to take it from Frodo. Now maybe the ring would have picked somebody else then. Maybe it would have been Legolas. Maybe it would have been Gimli. We don't know. Maybe Pippin. But it found Boromir to be the easiest to corrupt, and so he's the one that's being worked on by the ring until finally, of course, he tries to take it from Frodo, and then this breaks the Fellowship apart. But if the Fellowship hadn't been broken apart, right, what would have happened? I mean, it would have been disastrous, because Aragorn is telling them when they're in Parth Galen, look, dudes, all 8 of us can't just walk into Mordor. There's just too many. I would nominate like me and Legolas to go with Frodo, and then the rest of you go on to Minas Tirith. And others are like, no, we've come so far, you can't leave us behind. We're all going to go, we're all together. And Aragorn's just seeing complete disaster with this, and it would have been a disaster. But that's not what happens then, right? Boromir tries to take the ring. Frodo and Sam go off to Mordor alone, and everyone else attacks the war from other angles, right? And then the other Pippin and Merry get kidnapped, but their kidnapping then brings the Ents into the war and Rohan into the war, and you have the defeat of Saruman, which wouldn't have happened if they hadn't been captured, right? So, and you even have, because Aragorn then follows them to Rohan, and then he goes to the under the mountain to get the dead to fight with him. And back to Lord of the Rings. So Aragorn brings in the legions of the dead. You get Rohan, you get the Ents, you get the defeat of Saruman. All these things happen because the Fellowship gets broken, and the Fellowship gets broken because Boromir was tempted by the ring. So If Faramir had gone, things would have happened very differently. And so it seems that whatever decided that Boromir was plan B, that worked out, fortunately. But because he was plan B, then it's clear that whatever is watching over everyone isn't forcing anyone to do anything. Um, People can or cannot do what they feel is right. In fact, the elves are just so worried about stepping on people's free will that Elrond then is even telling the Nine, I'm not going to ask any of you to take an oath that you will stay with Frodo or you'll see this through the end. And Gimli's like, well, but taking an oath can help strengthen you when you need some help, and you just realize, well, I took this oath and I promised I'm going to do this. And Elrond said, but I can't ask this of you when I don't know what circumstance you could possibly find yourself in. So you need, obviously, then to be able to choose at that time, what is your path going to be? I also find it interesting that the older characters, like Elrond and Gandalf, will sometimes mention something like chance or luck, and then they'll kind of follow up with, like, luck helped us, if luck you call it, right? So they do feel this, that the higher power is kind of looking out for them, but isn't going to directly intervene. It might nudge people here and there, it might send a dream or whatever, but it's not out there like moving the chess pieces. Now, another theme that shows up a lot is, like, what is evil? And this is a problem. The problem of evil has been well known in philosophy for a long time. If God is omniscient and omnipotent, then why is there evil? Because if God doesn't want there to be evil, clearly he could merely just sort of wish it out of existence, right? He's omniscient and omnipotent. And if there is evil, then God would have had to know that it was going to be there because he's omniscient and omnipotent. So the fact that there is evil is kind of hard to explain in a world where a God is supposed to be omniscient and omnipotent. But in the world of Middle Earth, the way we get around that is that God, who is above everything, is kind of like, drawn back. He creates the world, and then he lets some of his chief angels and some of their servant angels go down and rule the place, but he limits their powers, and he gives them instructions that they can't really like directly interfere. They can just sort of like watch over and maybe nudge things a little bit, but they can't really like decide. That's not their place. It's for humans and elves and whoever else is around. They get to decide what their fate's going to be. They get to decide how they are going to develop over centuries and millennia. And except for maybe the occasional dream or the occasional nudge here and there will be no interference with them. And then certainly God is not interfering, because God has basically withdrawn and said, okay, you want to be on this world, that's fine. I'm leaving. You have it. The only time that, of course, that God changes his mind on that is at the end of the first age, when the chief of his angels, who's on earth, basically just says, hey, God, we can't do it alone. You've got to help us. We put down any power that we have, and we want you to come in and do something and help. And so God does. But that is the one and only time, in, as far as I know, in all of Tolkien's works, where God like directly intervenes in the affairs of the earth. And otherwise, he is maybe doing something else somewhere else, or just watching from a distance, but he's not literally moving pieces around. And his angels have specific orders not to do that too, even though apparently they could. So we don't necessarily have the problem of evil in the sense that, why is there evil? Why can't you just get rid of it? Well, their powers are limited. They can't just get rid of evil. Okay, but what is evil? And so what we have in Tolkien is a wearing away. Like, everything is good. In fact, Gandalf says nothing is evil in its beginning. Even Sauron was not so. So Sauron and his master from the first age, Morgoth, they all start off good, right? And they're like good and pure. But what happens is they start to think about themselves more than others. They start thinking about things they want to keep, or that they want to be separate from God or from the other angels, and they want to rule over things. They want to put their will over others. They don't like that others have free will. They want to have free will, and then they want to tell others what to do. So little by little, this eats at them, right? Eats away at them. And it's kind of like corrosion. And so it sort of drip, 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 drip over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia, that this happens to them. And eventually, there's really nothing left inside. There are many places in Lord of the Rings where evil is described as empty. When Frodo puts on the ring at Parth Galen, or Amon Hen, he's like looking into this pupil. He's like looking through this pupil is like looking into nothingness. And when he and Sam are walking by Minas Morgul, um, it's mentioned that the windows open inside into emptiness or nothingness. And it's kind of an interesting way to describe it, because normally you think about windows as things that you look out of, but in Minas Morgul they look inward, and the inwardness is empty. So it's this emptying out that is what consists, kind of what evil consists of in this world. It's the same thing with the ring wraiths. They start off as men, but slowly, drop by drop by drop, they're a little more evil, a little more evil, a little more evil today than they were yesterday, and a little more evil tomorrow than they are today. And it just as this wears them down, wears them out. And so now, after thousands and thousands of years, there's nothing left of them. Gandalf says they're wearing their black cloaks to give shape to their nothingness. Okay, so they don't have free will, they don't have names, they don't have a form unless they throw some black cloaks over it. They're just nothing except misery and despair. Just being near them brings this terrible despair to anyone who's not dead, and it's just very, very difficult to stand up to. Even toward the end, when we have the Nazgul fighting at Minas Tirith, it's just being near them, or that really like can cut people down. This horrible, horrible despair that just follows them around. And when they cry, it's just so terrible that people can't withstand the despair that's in this cry. And they're despairing because there's nothing left of them, right? There's just misery. There's just this burning nothingness that they can't hardly abide it from moment to moment, and yet that's their existence. We see it a little bit more with the mouth of Sauron. He's described as a black Numenorian, but he is someone who was a man, and he has given up his name, his free will, all of that to serve Sauron, so that he is simply the mouthpiece of Sauron. The words that come out of his mouth are Sauron's words, and he is just an empty shell of a person now. And that's kind of the way things are. So having a name, having your free will, having, hope, those are the kind of things that make you a person in Lord of the Rings. And the opposite is what makes you the sort of evil, empty shell of a thing that feels terrible despair. So we see that this internal emptiness is what Tolkien's evil characters get left with, and this emptiness has no harmony, it has no creativity. When Morgoth became the first angel to basically break away, he tries to write his own music, or to perform his own music. Before this, the angels were all singing in harmony with God's will for the universe. They're all helping God sing it into existence. Everyone is blending together, and this is the most beautiful sound that's ever been made. And so these wonderful things are being created out of sound and their joy and their harmony. And then comes this horrible blaring something. It's got no harmony, and it has no great tone to it, and it's just repeating the same boring sound, or terrible sound, over and over and over again. And finally the others finally fall silent, because this horrible atonal wailing is the music that Morgoth is trying to produce, but he can't. And so evil has no creativity in Tolkien. This is really, really important to the story, because the good guys are creative, and they can put themselves in someone else's shoes. They have empathy, even with Sauron, even with his followers. And Gandalf says he has pity even on his slaves. And Aragorn at Helm's Deep goes out and tells the orcs, look, something's going to happen to you before dawn. I just know it. If you turn around and walk away now, you can live. So just leave. And of course, they laugh and they don't leave. But it's like Gandalf and Aragorn can't not feel some pity, even for the orcs that are trying to kill them. And so Aragorn goes out there with arrows going by him, and he's like, "Look, you can save yourselves. Just leave." So our good characters do empathize even with the bad ones. And this is important because then they can figure out what Sauron's going to do. So, for instance, Aragorn knows that Sauron knows that somebody on the good side has his ring. Now, if it were Sauron, he would take it, right? He's not going to leave one of his slaves with his ring. He's going to go get it from them. And if they even think about taking it and trying to use it against him, and they want to set themselves up as the next Sauron, he's going to take care of it, and they're going to go down, right? So when Sauron thinks they have my ring, the only thing he can think they're going to do with it is give it to the most powerful one, or the most powerful one will simply just take it. And then the most powerful one will try to come kill him and then rule and have dominion over everything. It never occurs to him, one, that the good guys don't want dominion over everything because he wants it, therefore they must want it because he has no imagination. Secondly, it never occurs to him that they're going to let a hobbit carry it around. I mean, it's the most powerful weapon, basically, that's ever been invented. And so clearly, Aragorn is going to take it as the heir of Isildur, and Aragorn's going to do exactly what Sauron would do. He's going to rush out onto a battlefield with the ring, and he's going to try to defeat Sauron. And Sauron's thinking, yes, because he won't have time to learn how to use it. It's my ring. It responds to me. So as soon as he's out on that battlefield wearing that ring, I'll be able to get it from him. Because that's exactly what he would do. If he gets his ring back, he's putting it on. So when he's getting reports from his spies or from his people that these two spies have been captured at Cirith Ungol, he's like, yeah, two spies? That's dumb. Why'd they send two spies? I don't care. And so he just proceeds doing what he's going to do. He completely ignores what's going on that's important, because to him it's not important. It would never be important to him to have two spies wander around. So obviously it's not important, because if he can't imagine it, it doesn't happen. So evil in this case is always going to be short-sighted, selfish, and just completely unable to figure out the enemy's plans, because the enemy can figure out his plans. So when Aragorn has the Palantir, he knows that Sauron's going to just assume that Aragorn has the ring. And so Aragorn doesn't have to lie, doesn't just say, I have the ring. He can just do something really like he's full of himself. And so he touches the Palantir and he contacts Sauron's mind. And he's going to have this willpower battle with Sauron, knowing that Sauron will assume that because this heir of Isildur is so arrogant, he thought he could beat me by looking into that Palantir. He's got my ring. Okay, that's the only thing that Sauron's going to see. Aragorn just has to be, kind of like full of himself enough to like, oh, I'm the heir of Isildur and you're just Sauron. I'm going to come defeat you. And Sauron's going to walk right into that trap, which he does. So that's just a little bit about free will and evil in Tolkien. If you have any thoughts on that, you might want to leave them down below and we can have a discussion. If you want to come back and talk about it because you have a differing opinion, that sounds cool too. Let me know, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.